Awesome. Hello, everyone. My name is Agudemo Barjigan. I am currently a postdoc at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, and I am also a student trainee representative from ARO, working with the Diversity and Minority Affairs Committee. And specifically, I help organize coffee hours, and today is one of them. So I am so thrilled to be here with you all today to talk about diversity statement, which is one of the job application materials for tenure-track job application. And there's definitely a lot of myths around it, and we definitely need to talk about it more. And today we have five fantastic speakers joining us today. So in terms of logistics of today's coffee hour, I am going to first ask each of the five speakers to briefly introduce themselves, a little bit on their research, and maybe more on their experiences on either writing a diversity statement or reviewing diversity statements from, as a search committee member. And then after that, I am going to, so we're going to open the floor for free discussion. So Betsy Driver is also joining us today, and Betsy and I will be moderating the discussion today. So the discussion will be in the format of Q&A. So if you have any questions at any point of today's coffee hour, please ask them using the link in the chat. Do we have a link already? Yeah, so there's a link in the chat, and you can post your questions anonymously using that link. So please use that link to ask questions. We will be collecting questions for discussions. So without further ado, let's get started. So our first speaker is Dr. Marina Augusto Silveira. She is an assistant professor at the University of Texas at San Antonio. So Marina, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thanks so much. I'm very happy to be here today. So, I'm an assistant professor at the University of Texas at San Antonio. I just started in January. So what it means, I was on the job market very recently, and my experience with diversity statement is mostly writing them. I haven't reviewed any yet. So when I was writing my diversity statement, I got advice from many different people on how to write it. And in case you're not familiar with the University of Texas at San Antonio, we are a Hispanic serving institution. So diversity and mentoring with diversity is a big part of the mission of the university. So when I was writing my diversity statement, one thing that really stood up for me that I thought was very important to focus on is instead of like giving like broad and vague statements about diversity, I think it's very important to focus on your own experience and when you say specifically when you see where situations then people are not being as diverse and how you could change that and what are the strategies that you're gonna use in your own lab to mentor your students in a diverse environment. So for example, depending on the institution that you're gonna join, your students will come from very different backgrounds. So what are the strategies that you're going to use in your lab for mentor the students to bring everyone on the same page? So this was one of the strategies that I used to write my diversity statement. And I also think it's important to state what's your experience participating in activities that, talk about diversity, how you see yourself fitting in and, in this more diverse environment, and why do you think that diversity is important for science in general. So I think being really honest and focus on like very specific points rather than give a broad view that we all know that diversity is important was what it really helped me to write the diversity statement. And it's very different for everyone. Like we all experience very different types of diversity. So it's a very, very particular document to write. So yeah. Hope that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Marina. That is great. So let's move on to the next speaker. We have Dr. Jin Kong Kim. She is an assistant professor at the Washington University, St. Louis. Welcome, Jin Kong.
Hi, thanks for this great opportunity. Yeah, again, I'm Jin Kyung Kim and I'm at WashU now. And I just started my lab about 10 months ago. Like Marina, I'm new faculty, so I can share, the diverse statement writing more than like I haven't reviewed anything. But like actually when I heard about diversity statement, I had no idea what it is because I'm from Korea and we usually don't have this concept, right? And then I need to learn what I should write in there. And basically, for the diversity statement, I think you should just describe your past, present, also future contribution to promoting diversity and equity. So more specifically, that statement probably can include your personal background and also experience, including your contribution to there. For example, I'm an Asian woman, and I shared my detailed experience as an Asian woman. And also, I had a chance to work with two undergraduate students when I was a postdoc. With who has the cochlear implantation. And then I just shared my experience, how I mean, how the like that collaboration work with them, and also what I learned from there. And then, and then in the statement, you can also share how you build your philosophy about the diversity. But like Marina said, I try to write the detailed, not that, like big concept, but like it's probably worth it to share your detailed philosophy and also the commitment to the diversity. And then lastly, probably you can share your details plan describing how you make like your lab or your classroom just more supportive environment for everybody, especially the minority. So like the institution or the department who hire you really want to see that like person has really demonstrate, I mean, that person aware and the diversity and equity and have any specific plan for the action related to that, because you are going to be the like leadership position, in your lab and also in the classroom. And one more thing I want to share was that probably many institutions have the workshop or seminar on this issue. I mean, on this like diversity and equity, because I when I was a postdoc, there was a 3 days workshop for diversity and equity, and it really helped a lot to build up all my philosophy on the diversity. And also I just learn why it's very important, why it's valuable. So that helped a lot. And I recommend you to find that types of, like some learning opportunity in your institution or in your community. Yeah.
That is really wonderful, Jin Khan. And so our next speaker is Carlos Benitez Barrera. He is an assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. Welcome, Carlos.
Thank you, Agudemo, and thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Carlos Benitez Barrera. As Agudemo said, I'm an assistant professor at UW-Madison, the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders. This is I'm starting my third year in September. So I also have experience writing the diversity statement, but I don't have experience reviewing. So I can reflect on how I wrote my diversity statement when I was applying to jobs and how differently I would do it if I had to do it again, because I've learned during these 3 years a little bit. So I was thinking the other day, okay, so what should I change, or what could I change if I had to do this again? So I understand that this is a confusing thing to do, and most people don't really know how to approach it. And that's how I felt when I was applying for jobs. I really didn't know how to write it. I didn't know what was expected from the search committee, and that was nerve-wracking. So I feel like you guys can be in a similar position. And the reality is that when you apply to jobs, they don't, or most places don't tell you what they want you to write about. But there is one place, so I'm going to share this with you guys, that was super helpful. So I applied to San Diego State University, and they had like very clear guidelines of what was expected for them. So I'm going to share the link here in the chat, and you guys can take a look to it, because it helped me a lot writing my diversity statement. So they have like here 8 criteria that you need to include as a candidate. Who determines if a candidate meets the criteria, and how we determine if the candidate meets the criteria for diversity and all of that. So you guys can use those concepts. I think that's like a practical thing to have handy for your statement. So I used that, and so it was super helpful, and hopefully you guys can use it too. But if I had to do it again, I think I would do it differently, even though I had the tool. So now the way I see it is that you can really use the diversity statement to strengthen your application. So it's like the icing on the top. So you have on the cake, the icing on the cake, or the cherry on top. So you have your, research statement, your letters of recommendation, and you're kind of, advertising yourself to the search committee. And then the diversity statement, I think you can use that to wrap everything up. And that's what I would try to do, like kind of use the diversity statement to say, this is my research, this is what I do. And on top of this, I'm going to include diverse students. I'm going to include, diverse populations in my research, and this is how I'm going to do it. So I think it's very important to, as the previous presenter was saying, to reflect about your past with diversity, your present, and your future. So I'm going to focus on the future. So how are you going to do it? Because I think in this type of diversity statement, it's easy to just talk, but not make much sense. But how are you going to promote diversity, and why is important that for you? So depending on your research, so if you work with human subjects, how are you going to include a diverse sample or a diverse group of participants in your research? How are you going to do it? How are you recruiting students, diverse students to your lab? What tools are you going to use? So now that I'm at the university, I learned that there are offices in the university that can help you with that. So for example, you can investigate. So in this university, I know that there is this, section at the university that I can use to bring students, diverse students, into my lab. Or for example, there are at NIH, I learned that there are these supplements, diversity supplements that they call. If you get a grant, you can apply for extra money to hire a PhD student from diverse backgrounds. So I think talking about how you are going to do it is important. I think that piece was missing from my application. So I think I would try to incorporate that. Like think about, I know this is important. I want to bring diverse students into my lab. I want to apply this to a diverse group of participants. So how I'm going to do that? That's what I would do differently. So I think we can discuss later if you guys have questions, but I think that was enough for my 5-minute pitch. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carlos. That was great. So now we're going to transition into faculties who probably have more experience as a search committee, reviewing diversity statements. So our next speaker is Thomas Coate. He is an associate professor at the Georgetown University. Welcome, Thomas.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. This is really a fantastic topic. So I've actually been here at Georgetown in the Department of Biology, which is an undergraduate department now for 10 years, starting year 11 here pretty soon. And when I was applying for jobs, I did not do a diversity statement. So that was not really a thing back then. But I have certainly sat on many search committees and read many diversity statements. And yeah, I think you could really tell a lot about people and their plans. So I agree that it is really an important thing. So I have a lab that focuses on the development of the auditory system. We look at the development of cochlear wiring. But beyond that, I do a ton of teaching. I'm involved in a lot of service and leadership. I am now the co-director of our undergraduate studies program here in the biology department. So overseeing about 450 students and their progression toward graduation. We do tons of mentoring. And yeah, I've sat on a number of faculty search committees. So programs or mechanisms by which we're trying to break down barriers to inclusion come up a lot in my life. So in reading the job applications, one of the things that I really look for is first and foremost a recognition that people are different and come from diverse backgrounds. And I even really love it if people can reflect on their own sense of intrinsic bias. It takes some courage, but I think it's really, really important to do. Recognition that people have different levels of interests, goals, and priorities, particularly those that might be different from your own. And I find that is particularly helpful if a candidate can reflect on that, if they are like me and are not from a marginalized community. And so related to that, what I really look for is like a real sense of sincerity, what people are thinking about and reflecting on, and importantly, what they're planning on doing. So it's good to see a description of some prior activities that somebody might have been involved in, like diversity, equity, and inclusion committees. This shows a good commitment to that as a goal. But I think actually more powerful are descriptions of actions that you have taken as a researcher, or that you plan to take as a researcher or in the classroom. So, inclusive pedagogy is something that we really focus on a lot here. And so if somebody has some ideas toward that, that's really helpful. So just as others have said, yeah, how in the statement, I think it's really important to get a sense of how one envisions helping remove barriers to inclusion in the research community and the classroom, and focusing on equity and diversity as part of somebody who builds a community. So getting a sense of those kinds of things, I think, is really important in a diversity statement. And I'll just end by noting that if you're like me and you're a white guy and you're like, well, how can I contribute to diversity? Well, it's through actions and inclusion.
Thank you, Thomas. So our last speaker is Dr. Ruth Litovsky. She also happens to be my mentor. She's a full professor at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. Welcome, Ruth.
Thank you so much, Agudemo. It's so great to see you in this role and to see so many faces and voices of people that I know and respect. I want to echo a lot of what folks have said, and like Tom, being more senior, I've been in my role at the University of Wisconsin for 23 years. And I have to say that when I started here, there was no focus on DEI. In fact, there was a little bit of apology if you were involved in promoting DEI, and I always felt like I had to tell my department chair, well, I'm going to be on this committee. It won't take anything away from anything else I'm doing on campus, and I got almost yelled at for agreeing to chair the campus committee on writing the new plan for diversity about 12 years ago. So things have changed a lot, and I'm thrilled to see the changes, but I feel like we have a lot more work to do. And when I feel like there are a couple of things I've been able to do and see in my position as leader. So when I was department chair, it was also during the time of Black Lives Matter and during the pandemic. And so one thing that my lab did, which I thought really changed sort of the lens through which we do a lot of the work that we do, was, first of all, as chair, I just immediately started writing statements online. I felt like no one's going to stop me from doing that. And that's sort of something you can do when you're in a position of power, is use your voice and leverage your voice to step forward and say, this is the time to speak up. So we started doing this work really following the tragedies of the police murder of George Floyd in 2020. And also we really live in a predominantly white, male-dominated culture. And I feel like as a woman in science, there was a very interesting set of experiences. I see Monita Chatterjee's here, and she and I have talked a lot about what it's like to be a woman in science, and for women of color specifically in places like the Acoustical Society. And we felt as a lab that our job, as we wrote our statement, was to engage with everyone in the lab, and everyone had a voice in the continued conversation. And when you write diversity statements, whether it's for your lab website or for a job job application, and I have to say, I now, in my position as associate dean in the college, I read hundreds of these. And what I look for is authenticity, embodiment of how you conduct yourself, and being realistic rather than over-promising, and talking in an intentional way about living in the DEI supportive role as an ally or as someone who is from a marginalized community, sort of how it's a living experience and it's not static. And by the way, Carlos, I thought your statement was great when you applied to Wisconsin.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you.
I really, really did. And there is an aspect which I think we want to name, which is that when you're leaning into this work, I know sometimes it feels like you're taking a risk, especially, in certain fields. I feel like at ARO, I've pushed so hard, so many times on so many things, and I've gotten pushback, often from senior white men who have said things that I think are really hard to hear. But I think pushing and stepping in and being very intentional about the why and the when and the where and the how we have to promote DEI and be, sense of belonging, and supporting each other and leaning on each other. We had a lot of pushback when I asked that we extend the deadline at ARO for the award of merit, because I felt that the slate wasn't representative of the community of members of ARO. And there have been other pushbacks when I wanted ARO to put money into supporting childcare, and I had colleagues who I like, but who would say, older white men who would say things like, well, my wife would watch the kids when I went to conferences, things like that, and just pushing back and saying, well, we are in the 21st century. We have to put our money where our mouth is to support the community. So I want to advocate, people in those spaces when you're leaning in and taking a risk and bringing allies along to help support you. So I'll stop there, but happy to answer questions.
All right, that's really wonderful. And so I'm glad that today's session is being recorded, and I'm definitely going to go back and summarize all the speakers' wisdom. So yeah, I think it's time for us to open up the floor for discussion. Betsy, do we have any questions coming in?
We don't have any that have been submitted yet that I've seen, either in the chat or, again, if you are more comfortable submitting a question anonymously, you can either put that in the idea boards link, and I can read it from there, or you could submit it to me privately in the chat and I can read it to the panelists. Maybe we can give folks a couple minutes to see if anyone has any specific questions. They can be addressed to the panel as a whole or to a specific panelist, if you have any questions. But I know we did have a few that we can start with just to get things rolling, hopefully. Okay, so here we have a first one. So is it a red flag if a department doesn't ask for a diversity statement? And I think maybe we can start with some of the people who just went most recently through the job search. So if anyone in particular of our junior faculty wants to handle that, please feel free to jump in.
I can say something about that. So I had a couple universities that didn't request a diversity statement, and I had the same question, is it a red flag or not? And then I got interviewed in one of these universities, and because it's something that I care about and I want to be involved in the EI and have a diverse lab. So I specifically asked while I was interviewing, what are the strategies of the department, of the university to improve diversity in the university, in the department. And at that case specifically, they were very open and had several plans to improve diversity and promote diversity. So I didn't see as a red flag just because they didn't ask in the application, because they were clearly on board with enhancing diversity in the department. But I imagine it comes down to the specific, and if you end up interviewing that place, you can just be open and ask about it.
Can I add one interesting thing that's going on in some states around the United States? Like at the University of Wisconsin, because of with the way that the state legislature dominates some of the way that they control some of the way in which job ads are posted. Actually, we are no longer allowed to request a diversity statement. So within the colleges and within departments and in discussions with chairs and deans, there's an agreement that you expect folks to, in their application, in a holistic way, include the way that they would embed diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in their teaching and in their research and mentoring practices. But a separate statement is no longer required. But if you don't write something about DEI in your application, we're going to wonder, it won't look as good. So it's kind of a tricky thing, just a little bit of advice that if it's not required, it doesn't mean you shouldn't address the topic.
Francisco, I see you have your hand raised. Do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. Thanks for all the speakers. They're really helpful insight. And sorry, my name is Francisco Barros. I'm a postdoc at the University of Washington. I'm working with David Rabel. And I've always kind of wonder, how do you have to balance in your letter what you've done in the past and what is your vision on the future regarding DEI? Because I feel that a lot of time people are like, oh, you need to post what you're doing, like many of you said, like action is what's important. But I also feel that sometimes you don't have a large list. You have what you have, but also you have a vision that you want to use in the future, like in your lab, in your classroom, and how do you balance that in your letter?
In my case, I mean, usually the diverse statement is limited in 1 page. So like I try to make half and half, but I really put some effort to make past and future like connection very closely, right? Because it's kind of logic, like what I've learned in my like previous experience or contribution, and what effort I just put, and then now I'm the better shape than before, and then how I like try to make the supportive environment for everybody. So I usually put like half and half. Like if you ask about like, how many pages, like I can put like past and future.
We have one question that's been upvoted also on the board that says, it's sometimes hard to convey sincerity in writing, especially formal writing, and asks if there's any tips.
I'll comment on that. I think that this is something that I was thinking before, and I think we can apply it to this question. And I think it was Ruth that mentioned authenticity. And one way to convey authenticity related to diversity is to include or to embed information about your plans or your past with diverse students or any type of diverse initiative, not only on your diversity statement, but also on the other documents, right? So if you are writing about your research and you embed what's your vision with your research regarding diversity, I think that's going to show that you're not limiting yourself to the diversity statement because you have to do it, but that you are truly thinking about it in a holistic kind of way. So that would be one tip, to include information in every single document that you are submitting, not just the diversity statement. That would be one.
Any of the other panelists would want to comment on that?
Yeah, I guess I would just say, just be sincere about your real life experiences that you've had. It is, and maybe that should come out naturally in your writing. And I guess this reflects on the other point about, it's probably true that some departments have not embraced diversity programs or don't have like a standing committee toward DEI. And if you're a postdoc looking for a job, you just may not have had many opportunities. So I think it's really important to just be honest about your own experiences and enthusiasm for promoting inclusion. And I think it should come out fairly naturally, that level of sincerity in your writing. Just definitely, don't try to, I think Ruth mentioned this, don't try to fabricate anything or make more of your past experiences than what you've had.
And I would just add one more thing, which is to do your homework about the institution that you are applying to. So instead of sending the same letter or application to every place, do some homework on who is there, look at their websites, look at models that you might want to follow, and talk specifically about the things about the institution and the department that speak to you, especially if there are DEI efforts that you feel like, oh, this resonates with something I've been thinking about or something I've been involved with, and I would definitely want to get involved with that, at this institution. So make it more individualized and specific to the places you're applying to.
That actually is directly touches on a question that we received in the chat, that how important is it to tailor your statement to each specific job application? And it sounds like you're saying it is very important, but if anyone else would like to comment on that, please do so.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's great to show that you've done your homework and looked into the standing committees that might be at any particular institution and say, I'd love to be a part of the team.
Yeah, I agree with that too, especially if you're applying to like Hispanic serving institutions, like it's the case of many institutions in the US that had some specific different types of diversity that you may want to highlight in your diversity statement too.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's critical. And actually, in my experience, when you're applying for jobs, at least in my case, you apply to many, and sometimes you have time to individualize your documents to some of them, but not all. At least in my case, And I was contacted mostly by universities in which I had documents that were specific to that place. So I think it pays the price. Yeah.
That was the same for me too.
Yeah.
The applications that I spent most time working on it were the ones that went through it.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Reza, you have a question? Would you like to unmute?
Hi, yes, I'm Reza Manipur. I'm a postdoc fellow at Dr. Verzano lab at NIDCB. Question that I had was, what are some common pitfalls that we can avoid when writing a diversity statement? And also, how can a new faculty member make sure that their statement is both authentic and also impactful, since as the other panelist, Carlos, just mentioned, there are some websites, for example, San Diego State University, that they have some guidelines, but just what can we make sure that, basically our statement is very authentic, is not like a similar kind of a template that we can use from the others. Thank you.
Well, I'll jump in and say I've read hundreds of these, and I think starting with your own experience is really important. Whether you might have immigrated from another country or grown up in this country, but in a certain geographical region, or if you lived in an area and went to school with, certain folks, or if whatever your lived experience, just be authentic about it, but then talk about how that has led you to lean into certain spaces during your life and what that brings in terms of your commitment to teaching, conducting research, engaging in mentoring in ways that are inclusive, that are supportive of other people's careers, that create opportunities for diverse set of opinions, and and even give examples of how you would handle a situation. We have situations here at Wisconsin in which, with gender fluidity, for example, a lot of professors have been caught off guard by being called or accused of being non-inclusive because they forget, or they're not as aware of the preferences and ways that students prefer to be acknowledged in terms of whether they have a gender or they're gender fluid. So there's been a lot of that in the classroom. And so talking about kind of how you would handle situations, I think gives you that, opens the door to understanding that you are really thinking and you're not just mimicking what other people might have said or done, or you're not just sort of being vanilla about it. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
I'll just add one thing to Reza's question first. Hi, Reza. Good to see you. So here at Georgetown, at least, our diversity committee, it's called the JEDI, Justice, Equity, and Diversity, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, is now a committee that is, one of our standing committees, just like our committee for undergraduate studies and our committee for graduate studies. And it has a place in all of our faculty meetings, just like everyone else. So it is one of our main committees, and it is it is a component of everything we do, DEI. And so I would just add to what Ruth said is to take these diversity statements seriously and don't half-ass them. Really put an honest effort into them, because many institutions like ours do read them very seriously. And it's not just like this extra thing at the end that is sort of an obligation.
Yeah, I'll add a very small thing to that. In our institution, these diversity statements are read by the committee, but also above. They're sent to their own diversity committee that's like on the College of Science level, so even above our department. So some universities really take, most of universities really take it seriously, so I will dedicate time on that.
Thank you. All right, Pedro, would you like to unmute?
Thank you so much, Bexy. Well, I'm Pedro de la Torre, research scientist at Mass Eye in Boston, with a joint appointment at Harvard Medical School. I'm working under the mentorship of Professor Arthur Inciculian, also collaborating with Professor David Corey and Marco Sotomayor. Well, I carry out my first, I got a message here. I did my first postdoc in Ohio State University with Marco Sotomayor, Professor Marco Sotomayor. Now he moved to University of Chicago. I think I came to learn more about how writing, how to write a diversity statement. I recently applied to a couple of universities, and it was quite interesting that universities are requiring this letter. But I'm a little bit worried about things that we have discussed here. Actually, I'm Latino. I'm coming from Colombia. I was born in Barranquilla. It's known as the happiest city in the world, but actually grew up in a rural village. So in my village, we have around maybe 300 houses, like actual families. It's an indigenous region, a lot of African Colombians there, and pretty close to the first free African descendant community in the world. It's called San Basilio de Palenque. I will share a link. And when I said that I'm worried, is because it looks like universities, or what we have discussed here, I would like to highlight something that Professor Tomás mentioned, which I really like it, and also Francisco Barros. So Professor Tomás mentioned that it has to sound very sincere what you're writing. And I heard words like marginalized communities. People don't want to hear that, and that's very important. If I were a professor reading a diversity statement coming from someone that I don't know, has no experience about how to be diverse, it will sound very like fake. So I think the most important part of a diversity statement for me, under my impression and my experience, I'm the first one in my family that went to university. I have 3 brothers. My dad he didn't went to high school. He just signed up his name only. He didn't went to school. So, and I ended up being the first in my region coming to Harvard. So I think people should know, and professors reading these letters, and that's why I said that I came to learn how to write it, but also it's important that professors also listen to what happens from the other side. In Colombia, we have at least 102 indigenous communities registered officially, and we have more than 5 African Colombian groups. And I think that the diversity statement should reflect what you also do. And that's something that Thomas mentioned to be also sincere, and Francisco. I think speaking is very important. Exactly as we submit a grant to any reviewer. So it looks like to get a grant and to get a PI position, we have to publish papers. We need experience to show and demonstrate that we can do our own work in the new lab. And now in the US, we have to show that everyone is inclusive with no experience sometimes. That's very dangerous because, for instance, I have an indigenous student in Universidad del Atlántico, Barranquilla. He's a master student, and he's trying to carry out molecular dynamic simulations and try to understand AAV therapy. Do you know how that student has to do to work with that? He has to take a car 7 hours to his native community to talk to the mayor of the community to get authorization to work for that thesis. So the diversity statement is more than what we want to reflect our white, black, and gender. Diversity is diverse, and people deserve to learn what we know in this privileged position in any university in the US. And I think we should promote a social appropriation of knowledge. Because in my case, I have to deal with the fact that I have to teach to my indigenous student gene therapy, but his leader is worried about whether he will lose all his culture because he's doing science. So I think as much as we can for these specific communities in Latin America, at least, it's important to understand that a student think different because they have their own cultures. And it's important to preserve those cultures while we learn science. This is my suggestion, and it's important that we also build a good and a better world, just listening to people and allow to people learn as much as they can and contribute to a diverse community. It has to be natural. It doesn't need to reinforce it. So please keep that in mind, and I hope we can build a better world for everyone.
Well, thank you, Pedro, very much for sharing your unique perspective on this, and we appreciate you participating today for sure. So thank you for your comment. Would anyone like to address that specifically? I think one of the things that came up was recognizing people's unique background was something that Pedro was talking about. I think we've touched a little bit on that already, but if anyone would like to maybe talk about a specific example or some challenge that they faced in terms of either writing their statement or actually just dealing with that in their lab or research job environment.
Sure, I'll take a stab at this. So teaching during the pandemic was quite a thing. I teach our introductory neurobiology class, usually about 50 students. And so I learned a lot about students' diverse backgrounds and relative privileges or lack thereof when we all went online. And so I'll just mention one of the most extreme cases. I had a student whose house in Baltimore lacked electricity. And so he was taking class from his car, where he would start the car and charge up his phone and take class over Zoom that way. And it was at that moment that I really realized how under-resourced certain individuals are. And it really gave me some real insight into my own privilege and how overly resourced I am compared to other people. So that was a moment that really helped me really think about implementing inclusive pedagogy practices in the classroom. I don't know how many folks are interested in a life of teaching. There is one little sticky note on the question board about notes on diversity in teaching and research statements. And I think, yes, it's always good, because at some level, if you're in academia and you have people who you are supervising or in the classroom, those kinds of practices are always welcome and helpful. So there, Betsy, I hit 2 questions at once. Do I get extra credit for that?
Yes, thanks, Tom, for doing that. I appreciate that. Yeah, so if there are any questions that are on the board, if the panelists could see, we're down to less than 10 minutes to go, 7 minutes to go. So if there's any questions, if you can see them on the board, if there's any that you'd particularly like to answer, please feel free.
Hi, I'm Monita. Can you hear me okay? I've had trouble with Zoom these days. I just wanted to add something. I really think this discussion has been phenomenal. Thank you all. Which is, in our field, we tend to have quite a lack of diversity in terms of our students, our faculty, right? And so something I really felt was valuable to me, especially when I came to the US from India. In India, everybody was more or less brown, and there wasn't that much diversity in my community or in my country. In the US, the diversity was incredible. It was one of the things I loved. And I sought out experiences amongst people who were not like myself, and I think that has really helped me always. And I would, to really understand others' perspectives and experiences. And I would really recommend seeking out spaces inhabited by people who are not like ourselves. And that really gives you that perspective and knowledge and understanding that makes your diversity statement that much more authentic, not just hanging with people who eat the same food that you do and, see the same movies and read the same books that you do and come from the same kinds of backgrounds, right? And that's the beauty, I feel, of being in the US, is we do have these opportunities that many of us coming from countries where everybody's very similar haven't had. That I would call it a privilege to be in a place with so much diversity. So I'd really recommend it. It enriches your life and makes your diversity statement so much more credible. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Monita. Appreciate your input. Just to wrap up, Agudemu, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add or to ask any questions in the last few minutes. Any of the panelists would like to add anything else. There are a couple more questions, but I think we've touched on a lot of them in terms of the balance between your experiences and your plans, how long the statement should be. I think, Jinkun, you said it should be about a page. Was that your experience in your applications?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Can I add one more piece of advice, which
Sure.
is to show your statement to folks who have recently been hired or to mentors, folks that are looking at these things, and just get a little bit of input and get feedback and be open to suggestions. Don't be embarrassed to ask for input and feedback. This is really an important step in your life, and I think a lot of people would be happy to give some honest feedback.
Yeah, so today's discussion has been really, really fantastic and wonderful, and I've learned so much. And yeah, as Bessie just mentioned, we have only a few minutes left. So I'm wondering if there's any closing thoughts or specific advice that you did not get to share with us today. If you do, please unmute yourself, and yeah, otherwise we can just close today.
Can I add the last comment? It's
Of
like
course,
a little bit off of the job search, but you're gonna use your diversity statement even after you're hired. A lot of this new young PI, junior PI, whatever they call awards, requires some sort of diversity statement too. So, you're gonna be used that even after you are hired.
Okay, that's really wonderful. And yeah, anyone else from the panelists who would like to share some closing thoughts or specific advice? All right. So thank you all so much for joining us today and really appreciate your participation.
I have
Have a
a quick question to the panelists. Maybe, is there any chance I could share my diversity statement so I can get reviewed by anyone around?
Feel free.
Yeah,
For sure.
I'm more than happy to. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
Awesome. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you all so much for joining.
Thank you.